gotta clearly depend on how bad the shot is, though. Because if you get fouled and knocked unconscious, and then you come back,
you're just gonna get knocked out.
Yeah.
If you get knocked out, that's why boxing, right?
Comes in with that right, and that sudden, quick, violent rotation of the head is going to transmit a lot of rotational force, not only through the brain, but also through the brainstem, absolutely leading to possibility of a concussion. Thankfully, it didn't completely knock him out, but could absolutely result in some delayed symptoms.
So it's like a big part of it is speed.
Anthony Joshua has a rare kind of speed that instantly changes everything inside the ring. And when Joe Rogan reacted to Jake Paul being hospitalized following Joshua's brutal knockout, it was clear that he was genuinely shaken by what he had witnessed. While breaking the moment down alongside Daniel Cormier, Rogan carefully explained just how terrifying that punch looked when it landed clean, emphasizing the sheer power and precision behind it. He pointed out that this wasn't just a heavy shot, but the kind of perfectly timed connection that can completely alter a fight and, more importantly, a fighter's future. Rogan went on to stress that boxing is an incredibly dangerous sport in ways many casual fans fail to truly understand, especially at the elite level where margins are razor thin. According to him, when a fighter absorbs a clean shot like that, the consequences can go far beyond a knockout loss, leading to serious and long-term damage that doesn't simply disappear after a few days of rest. He made it clear that combat sports outcomes are never fully predictable and that impacts of this magnitude can result in permanent injuries that follow fighters for the rest of their lives. You could hear real concern in Rogan's voice as he described how a fighter can appear completely unconscious in those moments, even if they somehow manage to continue afterward. Although Joshua continued to outbox him for the remainder of the round, Rogan emphasized that the damage had already been done, reinforcing the harsh and unforgiving reality of boxing at the highest level.
Not the outcome that we all expected. After the fight, though, Jake told Ariel Helwani that he was worried that he had broke his jaw. He said multiple times he was concerned that he had a fractured jaw. And certainly looking at this knockout punch that Anthony Joshua delivered, it is absolutely a possibility that Jake does in fact have a jaw fracture. I'd honestly be more concerned about a concussion. In fact, with most jaw fractures, the more important thing initially is to look for other injuries to the head, to the neck, to the airway. The jaw fracture potentially being there or not is going to be lower on the list often than whether there's damage to the airway, damage to the head. And so very possible to have a concussion or some residual symptoms from this, as Jake Paul's head is relatively still here. We see AJ comes in with that right, and that sudden, quick, violent rotation of the head is going to transmit a lot of rotational force, not only through the brain, but also through the brainstem, absolutely leading to possibility of a concussion. Thankfully, it didn't completely knock him out, but could absolutely result in some delayed symptoms. But you can see where the punch comes in, landing square on that left side of Paul's face. Jake's reaction was pretty telling too. Right away after it, we could see him going down on the canvas here and being very shocked. It doesn't look like there's any obvious deformity to the jaw. We won't necessarily always see a deformity to the jaw, but you could tell he clearly had realized that something serious had happened there and feeling the full power of AJ's right. And finally, on this last view, we can see a little bit better the exact location where the punch comes in. We'll talk about our jaw anatomy, the different areas of the bones, but your temporomandibular joint, where your jaw articulates with the rest of your skull, is sitting right around in this area, and the jaw is roughly coming down in this orientation. And so where that punch comes in from Joshua is a little bit more kind of flush right in the center of the mandible, but also up close near that temporomandibular.
Joe Rogan and sports physician Dr. Brian Sutter broke down the aftermath of the knockout in a calm, medically focused way that helped viewers truly understand what Jake Paul's body endured inside the ring. Sutter explained that the outcome of the fight itself was largely what many within the boxing community had expected, so the result was not shocking from a competitive standpoint. The real concern emerged afterward. However, when Jake Paul publicly admitted that he feared his jaw had been broken, which immediately shifted the conversation toward medical analysis. According to Sutter, a fractured jaw was absolutely a realistic possibility based on how cleanly Anthony Joshua's right hand landed on the left side of Jake's face. He emphasized that the angle, force, and precise placement of the punch all strongly suggested a potential fracture. But Sutter made it clear that from a medical perspective, the bigger and more dangerous concern was actually a concussion. While jaw fractures are painful and serious, he explained that they often take a back seat initially to more critical risks such as head injuries, neck trauma, or even airway complications, all of which can be life-threatening. The violent and sudden rotation of Jake's head, caused by the punch, likely sent significant rotational force through the brain and brainstem, and that type of motion dramatically increases the risk of concussion. Sutter also noted that even though Jake was not completely knocked out unconscious in the traditional sense, delayed symptoms were still very possible and something that needed close monitoring. Jake's immediate shock and reaction in the ring made it clear that he knew something serious had happened, and his facial expression and body language reflected the moment his body absorbed the full reality of that impact.
What do you think about Jake Paul, Anthony Joshua?
Boy. Well, realistically, it's one of the craziest propositions of all time. You take a guy who just had a boxing match that looks like a sparring match with a 58-year-old Mike Tyson, and then you're going to fight one of the absolute scariest knockout artists in the heavyweight division. Maybe we should watch the Francis Ngannou fight so you could see. Let's watch that real quick, just so you can see what Anthony Joshua is capable if he's fighting someone that's not in his league. Okay, look, Usyk beat him, and he beat him twice, and Andy Ruiz caught him in the first fight and dropped him and stopped him.
On the Joe Rogan Experience, when the subject of a potential matchup between Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua was brought up, Joe Rogan immediately described it as one of the most outrageous and dangerous fight propositions he had ever heard. He made it clear that, realistically speaking, the matchup made very little sense, especially when considering Jake Paul had just participated in a boxing match that more closely resembled a light sparring session against a 58-year-old Mike Tyson rather than a high-level professional bout. Rogan contrasted that experience with the reality of facing Anthony Joshua, who he described as one of the most frightening knockout artists the heavyweight division has ever produced. To illustrate his point, Rogan suggested revisiting Joshua's fight against Francis Ngannou, encouraging viewers to watch it closely to fully grasp what Joshua is capable of when he steps in the ring with someone who is not on his level. While acknowledging that Joshua has suffered notable losses in his career, pointing out that Alexander Usyk defeated him twice and that Andy Ruiz famously dropped and stopped him in their first encounter, Rogan emphasized that those defeats came against elite, world-class fighters operating at the highest level of the sport. He stressed that losing to champions of that caliber does not diminish Joshua's danger or legitimacy. Rogan had already warned well before the fight that the situation would not end well for Jake Paul, and looking back, his prediction turned out to be almost perfectly accurate. He explained that Jake had built his boxing career by facing older, retired, or semi-retired fighters who were well past their physical prime, often benefiting from experience gaps, age advantages, or carefully selected matchmaking. This time, however, Rogan noted that Jake was stepping into an entirely different reality, sharing the ring with one of the best heavyweights in the world, a fighter who was still active, still explosive, still mentally sharp, and firmly within his competitive window. Rogan warned his audience that the difference in skill, speed, power, and ring IQ would be severe and unforgiving, stressing that this was not another novelty fight or promotional spectacle. Instead, it was a high-risk scenario where the consequences could be serious, making it clear that this matchup was nothing like Jake's previous fights and represented a dangerous leap into territory where mistakes are punished immediately and brutally.
I actually watched the Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua fight. I think I would say that my conclusions now still match most of what I said when I was watching on the initial broadcast, which is that Joshua, he did look a little rusty to me. I'm sorry, but he did. That Jake is, probably a little bit better than we suggested he might be. When I say we, I mean like the hardcore fight community, the fight fans, the people who work in the industry to a degree. Sometimes there is a suggestion that he can't do anything. And I would be like, well, that's a little much. He can do stuff. I mean, it's limited what he can do. It's very limited what he can do. But there is a little bit too much anger towards him sometimes, or just dismissiveness, maybe is a better way to put that. And I don't really co-sign on some of that. He's got some ability. He's not good. Listen to me very carefully. He's not good. But is he the caricature that he is sometimes made out to be in terms of his pure boxing skill? I think it goes a little overboard sometimes. But that isn't the reason why I wanted to make this video. What I wanted to make this video about is two things. One, after the fight was over, I got on social media and people were like hugely negative about the fight. And I did not think that the fight was good. In fact, I thought the fight was, like most Jake Paul fights, pretty bad, although him surviving kind of feeds into the story of him being perhaps a little bit better than we sometimes think, although I don't really co-sign on that. Let me make the point. The first point is, I think people are overreacting a little bit. A little bit. People were suggesting when I got on social media that this was like the biggest farce they'd ever seen in their life, and that this was, how could he fight like this, and this was a disaster, and Joshua should have got him out there earlier. There is probably some evidence to suggest that I don't think Joshua was carrying him in the sense of, hey, they coordinated this ahead of time. But was Joshua really stepping on the gas? No, I don't think he was really stepping on the gas. There were times I think he clearly pulled his punch.
The aftermath of Jake Paul stepping into the ring with Anthony Joshua triggered a massive wave of reactions across the boxing world, with opinions pouring in from virtually every corner of the sport. While some fans were quick to praise Jake for his courage and willingness to face such a dangerous opponent, and there were certainly voices giving him credit simply for taking the risk, many respected figures within boxing strongly pushed back against that narrative. One of the most vocal critics was Luke Thomas, who made it clear that the praise surrounding the fight felt wildly exaggerated and completely disconnected from what actually took place in the ring. According to Thomas, people were applauding Jake not for competing, but merely for surviving, and he emphasized that there is a massive difference between those two things in boxing. He pointed out that Anthony Joshua did not fight at full intensity and appeared to deliberately pull many of his punches throughout the bout, a level of restraint that was noticeable to anyone watching closely. From Thomas's perspective, this was not a competitive boxing match in any traditional sense, but rather a controlled scenario in which a top-level heavyweight displayed discipline and professionalism instead of seeking a ruthless finish. He argued that Jake's performance failed to show meaningful skill development, tactical awareness, or growth that would suggest he is evolving into a serious boxer. Instead, Thomas maintained that Jake looked overwhelmed for most of the fight, struggled to engage with Joshua's strategy in any meaningful way, and ultimately failed to show real intent to win or even compete at a high level, reinforcing the belief that the praise he received was more about spectacle than substance.
We all know he broke his jaw. We all know we've seen the x-ray. There is a video of the x-ray that he showed us on his Instagram, so that was no AI. And it showed where his jaw had to be reconstructed and, wired, right? So he can't have any hard foods for a while. And again, I think Jake Paul is going to get respect for that, because it's one thing, because we all know about Jake. I think the problem with Jake was he was bullshitting us by giving us fights that we didn't want to see, for one, and for two, wasn't giving us fights most of the time of the people that could beat him. He gave us Tommy Fury, and then Tommy Fury actually beat him, which, whatever. But he did drop Tommy Fury with a left hook, so that was an impressive thing he did against the guy. Can't say the only guy now, because AJ fought him and knocked him out. But, other than that, though, fighting Mike Tyson, Anderson Silva, which Anderson Silva showed that he is still very dangerous and very, very, ready at 50 years old. You know what I mean? Like, what he did to Tyron Woodley was classic Anderson Silva. He picked his shots. You know what I mean? He moved with grace, he moved with wisdom, and he knew exactly what to do. And again, he should have went over to boxing a long time ago, but Jake beat him. So that just made Jake's, stock rise, right?
Lawrence Oswaki approached the situation from a different angle, but ultimately arrived at a similarly critical conclusion about the entire event, choosing to focus less on hype and more on the inherent danger of boxing itself. He emphasized what it truly means to step into the ring, explaining that in boxing, a single mistake can end a fight instantly, regardless of a fighter's fame, social media following, or how much preparation they believe they've done. From Oswaki's perspective, Jake Paul stepping in with someone like Anthony Joshua was reckless and posed a serious risk to Jake's long-term health. He stressed that boxing is unforgiving in a way few other sports are, and that dangerous mismatches do not suddenly become acceptable simply because they generate attention, headlines, or pay-per-view revenue. Oswaki described the decision to take the fight as unnecessary and foolish, pointing out how easily the outcome could have been far worse than what viewers ultimately witnessed. Despite the heavy criticism from experienced voices like Luke Thomas and Oswaki, there were still some commentators who acknowledged Jake Paul's willingness to absorb punishment and continue fighting. Following the bout, Reports confirmed that Jake was taken to the hospital and suffered a serious jaw injury that required medical evaluation, which some interpreted as evidence of toughness and mental resilience. These voices argued that regardless of the technical performance, Jake showed courage by stepping into the ring with a fighter of Joshua's caliber and elite-level experience. However, this praise focused far more on heart and durability than on boxing fundamentals, skill development, or tactical ability. Even among those offering limited credit, there was no serious endorsement of Jake as a legitimate professional boxer who belongs at this level of competition. The narrative remained centered on bravery rather than ability. While taking damage and continuing is respected within boxing culture, it is not enough on its own to build a credible career. Courage without competitiveness does not redefine a fighter's standing in the sport, and while Jake's injury highlighted the physical cost of accepting this fight, it also reinforced broader concerns about whether such matchups should happen at all from both a safety and sporting integrity perspective.
In that ring thinking, for my own credibility, I've got to knock you out, but I've got to try and knock you out where I'm not hurting you as much as what I could if I unleashed. Yeah. And with the punch you said that he landed, it's not his best punch, it's his most powerful punch, right? Yep. And he's shattered his jaw in 2 places, right? So Anthony Joshua gets his 70 million, 60, whatever it is. But I think he's sitting there thinking, thank God for that. Thank God. On a human level, I've come out, all right, I've sort of, not reputation, but I haven't hurt him as bad as what I could have.
There should be an awful amount of people breathing a massive sigh of relief. Anybody that put that fight together, athletic commissions, like you said.
It wasn't a fight.
No, it wasn't at all. Like you said, it was a prize fight. It was an event. If Anthony damages him, he's got to live with that for the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of stress to deal with, you know what I mean? So I'm sure he's bleeding the side of relief. The team that have put him in there, that have negotiated that for him, but the authorities that put that on and commissioned it as a proper boxing match, I've no doubt.
Does that go on his... Because
yeah, it's a professional boxing.
Do you know what? If I was Anthony Joshua, I would be saying, I don't want that on my record. But for the credibility of them putting the fight on, they would have said to him, no, we've got to say this. It's been commissioned. It's going to be a proper fight. And I found it... I love my boxing, but I just find the whole thing really, really unedifying. You said about get followers. You mentioned Tommy Fury. Tommy Fury is nowhere near his level of getting like a British title fight or whatever. Nowhere near. So it's basically he's like...
Beat Jake Paul.
Well, beat Jake Paul. But see,
but what I'm saying is that's 100. I stand by that, and I think Tommy would admit that. You know what I mean? To become a British champion is a very prestigious thing to do, and I think he would struggle to do that.
But I think when I was reading, he got 5.6.
True Geordie offered a more nuanced reaction to the situation, but one that was still fundamentally critical of the outcome. He acknowledged that Jake Paul's personal journey from entertainment to professional boxing is genuinely interesting from a human interest perspective, recognizing the discipline, commitment, and ambition required to even step into the ring at that level. On a personal level, there is something motivating about that story. However, when it came to the actual fight itself, True Geordie was clear that Jake failed to deliver in any meaningful way. He pointed out that Jake did not look like a fighter who truly believed he could win or even wanted to win, noting that his movement appeared hesitant and overly defensive throughout the bout. His offense lacked both commitment and power, and his overall presence in the ring suggested a mindset focused on survival rather than competition. Geordie emphasized that boxing is not judged on intentions, background narratives, or personal journeys, but on actions inside the ring and results on the scorecards. While Jake's transition from YouTube star to boxer may inspire some people, the performance offered nothing memorable from a sporting or technical standpoint. In Geordie's view, the broken jaw became symbolic not of bravery, but of the predictable outcome that occurs when clear skill gaps are ignored and matchmaking prioritizes spectacle over competitive balance. The reported £6 million payday further reinforced the idea that this fight was driven as much by business interests as by sporting ambition.
Hard fight for me to evaluate, because on the one hand, you know, Jake's come a long way, so you want to give him credit for that. But on the other hand, you want to get in there with AJ. You want to talk about you're going to beat AJ up, and then you fight in a certain way. It's very hard for me to kind of give the right amount of credit and criticism here, because the backstory is so inspiring, but the performance was not inspiring in some ways. I think for me now, I just want to see Jake Paul in a fucking competitive fight. And that's the problem with the direction he's been going in, is he puts on big fights, but not competitive competitive fights. Fighting Chavez Jr., that was an easy win. Nate Diaz, an easy win. Mike Tyson, an easy win. Anthony Joshua, not competitive for the opposite reason. He's completely not expected to win, and it wasn't competitive. He stacks the chips too heavily either way, and because of that, we never actually get to find out how good Jake is. And part of that, I think, is maybe deliberate, because then we never know and the storyline can go anywhere. And while you don't know really how good he is, there's always another dream to sell, and it's almost genius level promoting. It really is. But for his own sake, you're getting into your late 20s now, your physical prime, you're only going to ever find out how good you really are by getting in there with people who are of the level that you claim you're at the right weight class. You are not a cruiserweight. You've got a layer of, body fat on you. You can't be doing that in boxing. If you're a serious boxer, you don't get in there looking like Jake Paul looks. You look shredded. And that's why really he's a light heavyweight. But fuck it. If you want to be cruiserweight, be a cruiserweight. Regardless, just fight people who are now ranked, and let's find out where the fuck he is. Because surely, these money grab Tyson fight, the AJ fight, he's packed that bank chock full. And credit to him. Even if he has hustled people or whatever the fuck, credit to him. One of the best promoters in boxing history, actually. I really do believe that. Because even when fights seem ridiculous, he always gets people.
Paulie Malignaggi emerged as one of the most outspoken and harshest critics following the fight, and given his background as a former world champion who spent years competing at the highest level of professional boxing, his expectations for the sport are strict and uncompromising. From his point of view, the bout failed on every level that matters in real boxing, and he dismissed it entirely as unserious and fundamentally uncompetitive. Malignaggi was blunt in his assessment, stating that Jake Paul never genuinely attempted to win the fight and instead appeared focused on lasting as long as possible without taking catastrophic damage. He took issue with Jake repeatedly dropping to one knee during the bout, arguing that it reflected a mindset centered on survival rather than competition, and criticized the way the fight was framed as entertainment instead of a legitimate contest between two professionals operating on equal terms. His frustration was rooted deeply in respect for the sport and the brutal realities required to succeed within it. Malignaggi emphasized that boxing careers are not built through shortcuts, viral moments, or promotional hype, but through years of sacrifice, discipline, and suffering, countless hours in the gym, punishing sparring sessions, and low-paying, low-visibility fights that forge a fighter's skill, toughness, and experience long before the spotlight ever arrives. From his perspective, watching someone enter the ring under vastly different conditions, bypass that traditional path, and then receive praise simply for surviving felt like a slap in the face to fighters who dedicate their entire lives to the craft. He argued that this kind of spectacle blurs the line between real competition and entertainment, ultimately undermining the standards that give boxing its legitimacy. Rather than advancing the sport or inspiring future fighters in a meaningful way, Malignaggi believed the fight risked damaging boxing's credibility in the eyes of serious fans who value skill, competition, and earned achievement over hype and novelty.